Welcome everyone to the latest episode of a series I like to call History Speaks. Now, on this week's show, I'm thrilled to welcome a lady who set out with a goal in life to become a writer. She's originally from California, but today resides in Oregon. Kerry has already established herself as an award-winning writer, and today we'll discover much more about her life and books. So please give a warm welcome to my guest this week, Kerry Chaput. Hi, Kerry. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you for having me.
It's not a problem. I'm looking forward to this one. It's not every day you get to speak to a fictional writer. Should we put it that way?
Yeah.
So, as I usually do with these chats, I start off with something it's a question, but it's just something kind of to break the ice, put you at ease, whatever you want to call it. So, with yourself, I was going to ask which books or authors have had the biggest impact on your career?
Well, many, obviously. As far as modern authors, I would say my favorite is Ruta Sepetys. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her. One of her most famous books is From Salt to the Sea. And she's just an incredible historical fiction writer. Incredible. I've read her whole catalog. I think she's amazing. I also really love Kristen Hanna. There's many historical fiction authors that I love. But going back in time, the book that turned me into a reader and a writer was The Diary of Anne Frank.
Which is a very kind of, well, it's very famous. But yeah, it's a tragic story, isn't it?
Yeah. And, I read that when I was 12 and she's writing from the mind of a 12-year-old, and it hit me in such a profound way. It was the first book that I remember reading for my own. I picked it up myself. It wasn't through school, and I read it in a day, and it just kind of changed me.
But that's not really a fiction book, because it's what, no. So, I mean, we'll get on to how you get into fiction and all that kind of stuff anyway. But it is, like I say, it's a tragic story, and it's one that's resonated ever since that time, hasn't it, with people around the world?
Yes.
Anyway. Never changed. Mm-hmm. But let's get on to your questions then. So, how did you first become interested in history, and what in fact is your background?
Yeah, my father was a teacher of U.S. history. And so I kind of grew up around history in general. It was very much part of our world. And when I was a kid, he probably started this even before I was born, but he used to host his honors history class in our living room. And so it was 16 and 17-year-olds from school. And these are the ones that were more college bound. And they would come to our house every Thursday night. And from the time I was tiny, like a toddler, I remember this happening. And he would put out food and sodas, and they would debate history. And he would pick a topic and say, go research for a week and come back and be prepared to debate. And they did it every week, my whole childhood. And so I used to hide behind the couch and listen. And from the time I was really small, I was listening to all these debates. Like, history kind of came alive right in front of me. And that's sort of where it started. And at a really young age, at around 8, I remember listening to some of these debates and realizing that I had been listening to stories of men from history for years. And I didn't hear any stories of women. They just weren't discussed. And I went to my dad and said, I want to hear women's stories. What? And he kind of gave me a few names and said, oh, go research them. But it was just really not part of the dialogue. And so from that point on, I had a really strong interest in women's history.
I think, and I've always said this because, I mean, I would do this YouTube channel, which is based mainly on women's history, because I just find it so much more fascinating than talking about the guys. Do you know what I mean? The men obviously had a role out there, but the women's stories are just so much more interesting.
Well, and frequently they're so surprising because we have this image of what women were in history, and it's such a small, tiny piece of what they really were. And so when you find these stories that are just outrageous or shock you, you think, this can't be real. But it really is just so shocking how many stories have not made it into our consciousness.
And I'm still looking for women to write about, not to write about, to create a video upon. And I've covered probably hundreds. I've done over 500 videos, and I've created nearly every one, except for the odd one or two, is about women. But there's still so many more out there with just such fascinating stories.
Endless, I agree.
It's just endless. It's absolutely endless. Was writing a career that was it always something you wanted to do, or was it something that you grew into over the years?
A little bit of both. I was 12 when I started writing stories, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I just enjoyed it. And pretty quickly, my parents said that was not going to be a viable career. It was, not steady enough, and a little frivolous is sort of what they made it sound like. And then honestly, my teachers weren't overly supportive of it either. Any interest I had in writing was really just shoved aside, and I was redirected towards a more stable career. And so I did that. I went all the way through multiple degrees and got a pretty stable career in healthcare. And then I wrote my first book at 25, my first attempt at it anyways. And I was so insecure. I told one friend that I was writing it, and I saved it to my hard drive, and I didn't look at it again for 15 years. And then I finally at 40 said, I'm done. I'm done living for other people. I'm done letting people dictate my life. I've always wanted to write. I'm going to do this. And so I pulled up that old story from 15 years before and finished it. And
it worked.
Well, it was my first one. So, it worked enough, but it needed a lot of work. But, each story, you learn more and you develop your voice, and you learn. So it was a good step into my new path in life.
It's a bit like, it's like anything in life, isn't it? There's a learning curve, and it's the same whether you're a writer, whether you're a bus driver or an airline pilot or whatever you want to be. Even a film star, you've got to go to a school to learn to act to some extent. Yes. It's exactly the same with writing, I guess.
Yeah. And I think any creative endeavor is a lifelong pursuit. Like, you never really become the level of proficient that you want to be in creative endeavors. And so I kind of love that about writing.
I mean, it's always interesting to me to hear how someone's path in writing takes shape over time. And once that path begins, though, the real challenge then often becomes knowing where to begin. Mm-hmm. So how do you start a book with a character or a situation? Or, I mean, what do you look for?
Yeah, I do. Same as you, I research women's history just constantly, and I'm writing articles on my Substack and doing highlights of different women. I did a lot of videos on TikTok and on social media about these women. And so it's constant information that I'm bringing in and I'm thinking about, and it's always in the background of my mind. And I don't write biographical historical fiction, so it's not really necessarily based on one person, but all of these women's stories really, they hang out in the back of my mind, and they start nudging me, and they'll start asking me questions about what if. And I do a lot of daydreaming, and I think a lot about ideas, sometimes for a year, 2 years, 3 years before I start them. But they always in the background are from the research, from the historical research, and these women that surprise me and do these things that make me go, what? But that's amazing. And it's almost always a story of women pushing against societal expectations. Almost always. It's a surprise. It's taking their own path. It is, taking the hard way. They always sort of start there. And then I work with that and ask a lot of questions about what if, and how do I bring this story to life? And then over time, it just sort of develops until that moment where you go, yeah, okay, I'm ready. I think I know it now.
Because it's fiction and you're basing your characters, I guess, on real world people. How do you kind of adjust the truth from and the fiction? How do you kind of blend that to become one sort of thing? And also, I guess, make it sound realistic to the reader.
Yeah. And what's wild is some of the things that get questioned from my critique partners or even from readers that they think are fiction are actually real. The things that sound outrageous they're historical. They happened, I mean, And so I love that. I love being inspired by these stories. And then the fiction part, I really stick with, on my rough drafts, I stick with the humanity of it all. Like the things that people have been fighting for and yearning for had not changed in the last hundreds of years, right? So if you stick with the character development and the emotional arc of what this character is looking for, they're longing for, what they're working towards, if you stick with that human aspect, the historical story really should support that growth of the character. And so the majority of what I put in these stories, as far as the historical context, is factual. You know, the certain time period that I'm writing in, and the things that happen in that particular city or country, that's all factual. And then I blend in just the fictional world of the character with that.
That insight into your creative process really shows how much thought goes into shaping a story from the very beginning then. But shifting to your upcoming release, it's clear this next project took root in a very different time and place. Now, your latest book due out in November, if I'm right.
June.
In when, sorry?
June.
June?
Yeah.
The Wild as the Stars?
Yes.
Oh, is that June? Oh, is it? Oh, okay. Well, June then. Wild as the Stars is an interesting look at the Prohibition years. So how did that story originate?
That originated because I was researching vaudeville theater, and the women of vaudeville were some of the highest paid women in the whole world in the 1920s. And that fact alone just made me want to keep reading about it. And a lot of these women were acting as their own producers. They were setting their own pay schedules. They were demanding more money. They were standing up to the men in power and saying, no, I'm the show. I'm going to decide what I'm going to do. And they wore the clothes they wanted to wear, and they were dictating their own future. And I really loved that. So I started researching that. And as what I think this happens with a lot of authors, it definitely happens with me. What draws me to a story is frequently not what the story is deeply about. And I don't know what the story is deeply about until I'm in it and something comes up, an emotion or an experience that I'm trying to understand. That's the universe, like the universal, love of fiction, right? Is that it can pull out your own feelings. So when I started writing about Prohibition, Seattle is where it's set, and theater and women in theater and fighting against kind of the men in power and the laws that were put in place against them at the time, I started with that. And then as I started writing, the character developed a life of her own, as they always do. And I really wanted to explore mental health. I've had a lifelong struggle with anxiety and panic disorder, and it's something that is so rarely represented in books. And when it is, it's usually poorly done. And I wanted to reflect that. So I wanted to have that modern piece of what I have experienced placed in this world where you have laws, literal laws against women and what they can and cannot do. And it ended up being a story of the two. And there's some magical realism in there, which sort of heightens the whole experience of as a metaphor for mental health. And so it kind of combines a few things. And it always starts with the historical research, with a story that I find interesting, and then it builds from there.
Is it difficult to obviously do the research on the original story, but then is it difficult to incorporate these like subplots or even things that have affected yourself into a fuller story, if you like? How intricate or how difficult is that to do?
I think it depends on the author. For me, I don't plot my stories. I don't write outlines or detailed, descriptors of each scene. I don't do any of that. I go in blind and I write my story, my rough draft with a hugely open mind. I kind of like to sit there with a blank page with no plan and in a way let the story tell itself to me or let the character reveal themselves to me. So I'm really open to exploring different avenues and finding out, like you said, those subplots, and you naturally go towards the things that you understand or want to understand more, right? That's like the nature of where you are as an author and why the story is calling to you. And I always find it so fascinating that no matter how much I think I understand something, about halfway or 3/4 through, I go, oh, there it is. There's the big question that I didn't realize I was asking. Whereas some authors, I have some friends who they write every single detail down. They know exactly start to finish where the story is going to go, and they don't explore those offshoots as much. So it depends on your process. But for me, I really feel like that's where the magic is to staying open to the subconscious and that little bit of magic that is out there that you don't really realize you're writing until you're in it.
It is interesting to hear how a story takes shape and where that first spark of inspiration comes from. But what stands out too is how consistently women's experiences are at the heart of your work, and each one offering something unique. You cover many aspects of women through your books. Which one do you think has given you the most pleasure?
They all have served me in different ways. They've all helped me in different ways. When it comes to just the pure joy of the story, I think my trilogy, my Defying the Crown trilogy, was just fun to write. It's an adventure story, and it spans decades, and I got to really take adventure to another level, which I really feel is underrepresented in literature for women. I mean, women's stories tend to not be on adventures, right? And I want to do that. I want to talk about adventures. I want to talk about them using their bodies for these heists and these, these big adventures. And I just don't think it's something that we see a lot in women's literature. And so I had a lot of fun writing that story, which it's grounded in truth. The character itself, she took a different route than I anticipated. And she was a challenge, but also she was the character I think I understood the most from the get-go. She was very clear to me, and I was able to take her on these really wild adventures. And, they go through Versailles during King Louis's time, King Louis XIV, and there's poisons at court. There's all this dramatic stuff happening that really did happen in history. And I got to witness it through her eyes, which was really fun.
Did you watch any episodes of Versailles? Have you seen them over there in the States?
I have, yeah.
Because I'm just wondering, did you get any inspiration from watching shows like that, which are, of course, like the Tudors or any historical series? They're not correct. They're made for entertainment purposes.
Sure. No, all of my books, usually there is something that I'm watching that does inspire it. Like I'm writing a book right now that's set in Gilded Age, Manhattan. And I'm watching the show Gilded Age because it should put you in the mindset and the feel of what that looked like. You can kind of envision, well, these were the clothes, and this is how they would sit the table, and this is how they spoke to each other. So it does kind of get you in that feel. Like you said, I'm not looking at it for historical truths necessarily, because you want to find that more in your nonfiction research, but I think it's great for putting you in the mindset. So I did do that. And the trilogy, I was watching a lot of Outlander at the time. So they're very much inspired by Outlander as well.
I was going to say, do you have to be careful when you send them on these adventures that although like some of your readers have said, they think it's actual reality anyway, but do you have to be careful about how extensive these adventures are for the time period?
I don't think so. I think that as long as you're staying respectful of the time, the chases through Versailles, that was a lot of work because I had to go back to the year that it was set, and I had to find the layout of what the gardens were. And the gardens were different then than they are now. So I had to draw maps, and I had to put pieces together, everything that I read about this. At the time they had statues that were based on Aesop's fables. And so I had to know exactly where the statue was and what the layout of that one particular garden was and what it was made of. And then if you turned right, then it was a different garden. I had to really make my own map, which took me weeks actually, because nothing's in one place. It's all in all these different places. And so I was able to find my own way to make a visual so that when you go on this chase, which didn't happen, it feels real because everything that I'm putting into it is based in historical fact. So the environment and what happened at the time, and oh my gosh, the fireworks shows. They had fireworks shows for, in the 1600s. It was just wild. So they had an elephants and they had all this wild stuff. So it's based in historical fact, but what is happening to my character is the adventure within that.
Have you been to Versailles?
Have.
It's fantastic, isn't it? I went a couple of years ago. Fantastic.
Yeah, I love historical buildings. You can give me Versailles or you can give me a rundown cottage that is 300 years old. I love it. I love historical buildings of all stripes.
We'll get on to your favorite locations and things like that a little bit later on. But for now, it's always interesting to hear, I guess, which stories resonate most deeply for a writer, especially when their work covers so many powerful lives. Now, beyond the page, your blog also gives readers a chance to meet some truly unforgettable women. And your blog offers readers some incredible stories of what you call badass women. So out of those, which is your favorite?
This might surprise some people because I have written stories about the most outrageous women that have, rode into parties topless on elephants, right? Like I have written 16-year-olds that read revolutions. I have written some wild stories. The one person who consistently always is my favorite badass woman is Eleanor Roosevelt. Always. I am just fascinated by her, always have been. And what's interesting about her, many things, I could go on about her for days, but her contribution to our current day society in America is everlasting. The number of things that she brought to our society are still present that most people don't realize were her. Things like, childcare at work that was implemented by her. She was fighting for civil rights and women's rights back when nobody was, right? When no white people were fighting for civil rights. Well, not many, right? And here she was, part of some of the wealthiest family in the country. And she was a Victorian woman who was, wearing corsets and stuff. And she decided she was going to take this path of doing what she felt was right, regardless of what anyone told her what to do. And she did it in this really sort of quiet, thoughtful way. She was not the most beautiful woman in the room. She was not known for her beauty and grace. She was just a very dedicated, brilliant woman who we don't always think about because she wasn't out there and outrageous. She was doing it in a very steadfast, thoughtful way. And the more that they came at her and the more that they attacked her, the FBI had a file on her. They called her communist. They called her socialist. The more that they came at her, she just quietly absorbed that and used it for more power. And she became more powerful even after her husband died. And she sort of stepped into that, last third of her life. She did some incredible work.
So she was basically a plain speaker, but very intelligent one at that, I guess. That's probably the best way to describe her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess.
Well, my favorite little tidbit about her is that she once went to a civil rights speech she was going to give in, I think it was Kentucky. And the Ku Klux Klan had a bounty on her head for $25,000. And the Secret Service said, you can't go. And she said, watch me. She refused Secret Service. And she drove in like a Packard with a loaded revolver in her beaded handbag. And she drove through the crowd of KKK and said, I'm going to go give this speech.
That's just incredible. That's your next book there, by the way.
I know. It actually isn't a book. It's in my book, Chasing Eleanor. Yeah. So I could go on about Eleanor for days and days.
That's definitely your next book. Sharing those powerful stories must be incredibly rewarding, especially when certain figures really stand out and stay with you. Now, telling their stories across a full trilogy must have taken an enormous amount of time, care, and I guess digging into the past. So how much research did you have to do for your trilogy of books, Defying the Crown?
That was the most research I've ever done. Daughter of the King was the first of the three. And I spent at least a year researching and reading. I had to go, and there's not a lot out there for the time period that I was writing about. I had to go to university bookstores and find books that they use for classes on European history. That's where I found it. And it was a lot of work. The reason I found the story about the trilogy is actually I was doing my husband's ancestry. He is 100% French Canadian from Quebec, hundreds of years worth. And I asked my mother-in-law, where in France is your family from? And she said, I don't know. No one knows. I thought, well, that would be a fun little project. So I started researching, and the records from French Canada are just impeccable because everything was done through the Catholic Church. So the records just are so easy to follow. And I was able to track my husband's family back to the Middle Ages in France. But what stood out for me, and these are the moments that you probably experience as well with women's history, is that I started noticing this fleur-de-lis symbol with women that were born in France within a 10-year period, and then they were married in Quebec. And I thought, what is this symbol? I started looking it up, and it was called the Filles du Roi, the Daughters of the King. And basically it was a program back in around the 1660s. And the colony of Canada was really struggling. It was obviously run by the King of France, but they were losing settlers because there were no women. And so basically what they did is they went into these poor areas in and around Paris and different areas of France, and they offered women who really didn't have much future an opportunity. And they said, listen, we'll send you to Canada. We'll pay for your passage. We'll give you an honorary title of Daughter of the King. We'll give you money. We'll give you makings of a farm. We just want you to go and get married, basically. And so about 800 of these women did. And what's really amazing is that when they got there, they lived with the nuns and they held interviews. They had what is essentially like 17th century speed dating. And the women held interviews for the men. So the settlers came through, the women asked them questions, and the women chose their husbands. So they were running the show. They were completely in charge of their future. And then once they decided to get married, this was approved by the king. They were married by a notary, not in the church. So they could actually divorce their husband if they weren't happy. So these women in the mid 1600s had more power and control than anything that I've ever known in reading about history in the 17th century. So those are the moments that you go, why didn't I know this? Why didn't I know about these women? And I knew I had to write that story. And that's where the story starts, is Daughter of the King. She becomes one.
I was going to ask you as well, how did you go on finding sources about Versailles? I know you've been, you probably spent $1,000 on books just to take back home.
Yes, I have.
Where do you find the sources? Because I don't know what the state of that type of record is like in the US to get your hands on without having to go to Europe and get it.
Yeah, primary sources are minimal. I'll tell you that. Honestly, the Versailles website has some incredible resources. They have videos that show you the construction of it and what it looked like at certain times. That was really helpful. I was able to use their content to try to help make my map. I had the Versailles, that is in the third of the trilogy. So I had a bunch of research from my first book. I had an entire textbook written about King Louis and his reign and all of the details, day-to-day details of his life that I had read for my first book, just for knowledge of what was happening at the time. But I was able to use a ton of that. So there were huge sections about Versailles. So I was able to use that in the third book as well. So yeah, it's a lot of textbooks, and then it's putting pieces together of different things you find online. Obviously, you can't believe a lot of what you find online, but you have to look at the different sources. You can look at JSTOR. There's some decent information on there. So it's putting pieces together, and then anything that you have to adjust, it's good to put in the author's note and say, hey, I know this didn't happen at this time, or I had to adjust this for the sake of fiction. You want to use that whenever possible, and do your best. Because back then there's just not a ton of resources to be able to really rely on for writing.
Bringing an historical trilogy to life clearly takes an incredible amount of dedication and attention to detail. But stepping back from the past for a moment, it's interesting to think about where your storytelling instincts might take you next. Now, historical fiction is a very interesting topic when it comes to storytelling. Have you ever considered other non-historical times, for example, a story in modern-day USA?
I have not. I joke that I'm a lifelong history nerd and will always be so. I don't know, never say never, but the closest that I've come are a couple of dual timeline. I have my June release is a dual timeline, which is actually still not even modern. But the one coming out in February is set both in modern day Venice and 1609 Venice. So I do like exploring how the present connects with that historical story. But everything that I have planned for the next few years is in the historical fiction space.
So is that the one where it's set in two different time zones? Is it kind of like a time traveling type of fiction story?
The one that's coming out in February is told from two separate perspectives, a modern day woman and a woman from 1609. So they're related, but they're two individual stories.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, it is interesting to hear how writers like yourself explore different settings and eras in your work. Still, there's often a particular period that speaks to us more than others, and something about it just feels like home creatively, I guess. So as an historical writer, which period of time most resonates with yourself?
Yeah, all of them. I think that's one of my favorite parts of being a historical fiction writer is that I am constantly being pulled to different times and places, and I get to time travel. And I love that. So all of them, but I will say as a reader, I am very, very drawn to the Great Depression and Dust Bowl era of U.S. history, that 1930s time. It was so devastating and so earth-shattering for the people that lived at that time. I really am fascinated to read what happens to people when you take everything away. You take away their livelihood, you take away their homes, you take away their stability. Who are you? And that's really what those Great Depression stories tell, is where do you find your humanity when you lose everything? And I find that just endlessly fascinating. So as a reader, I will always pick up a Great Depression story.
It's very similar. I've just been looking actually. Like the last few, like it was interesting when you said that you cover all of history, and that is something I've always tried to do myself with the videos, because recently I've gone from Elizabeth Woodville, which is medieval, Hypatia, which is Alexandria and all that sort of stuff. And then I've just done, last week I did Lady of the Masons, Athelflaed. So, and this week I'm doing Edwina Mountbatten, which is, again, it's like 1,000 years apart. Do you know what I mean? But
I love it.
They're just fascinating stories. And so that's what I'm doing Edwina at the moment. I'm just doing one of there now, but it is fascinating. Like you said, I think very similar to my own thoughts in what you said is that I think history isn't or shouldn't be just one era or one period. And I know people do concentrate on certain periods. They'll concentrate on the Tudors, for example, which always is a favourite of many people I know. But for me, history is so much more than that. It's vast. You know, you can go back to Cleopatra and come right forward to, I don't know, whoever, Camilla, Queen of England today. You know, it's as massive as that.
Right.
And even things happening in the world today, in a few years' time, well, they are history already. But, you know, there'll be stories there about women that, again, somebody will pick up on in years to come and probably write a story about them.
Right.
You know, so.
That's what I love. I love that these women's stories from all different time periods and different locations had their unique challenges, and we get to read how they rose to the occasion. I love that.
Have you thought about doing one on like the suffragette movement?
I have. It's hard because when I look back and read quite a bit about the suffragettes, it was a very flawed movement. There was a lot of racism involved in the push towards the white woman's vote. And it's hard for me to really tease that out when I look at the things that these women accomplished were amazing, but they were so flawed that it's, when I talk about badass women, I love the ones who stepped forward for everyone, that whether intentionally or not, the choices that they were making were encompassing all women being able to step into their truth. And the suffragette movement is hard for me to tease that out.
I guess certain periods of history then really do stay with us and they speak to something personal, something that stirs curiosity. And sometimes that pull isn't just about time, but also about the place. Now, if you could travel to one part of the world to do some research, of course, where would that be?
Well, you'll like this. My answer is the UK. I love it there. I love it. My father was born in Edinburgh and came over as a child. So I grew up very much entrenched in, what they brought with them for Scottish culture. My grandparents really kept it alive. And my dad, he really Americanized himself. I never once heard his accent. He lost it as a kid because he was teased quite mercilessly. So he really Americanized. He was really proud of his Scottish culture, but he kind of, black and white. He was very compartmentalized. And my grandparents still had the thick accents, and they had the music and the silly sayings and all the things. They introduced us to all of that. So this really, really strong connection to my Scottish family. And we used to go visit every other year. But then we had kids, and traveling with a family of 4 across the pond gets difficult. So we actually are planning our trip next summer. And I dream of writing a historical set in Scotland someday. I think because of my own personal connection with it, I have a lot of pressure to do justice to it. And I want to have it be something really meaningful. And so I hold that out as something that, okay, I'm going to do someday. And so maybe next summer when I'm there, I can find the story I want to write. But my husband has traveled to the UK quite a bit. He went to his company in California, also had an office outside of London. And so we would go visit there quite a bit. And we love the UK. We go as much as we can.
I mean, Edinburgh is without doubt probably one of the most beautiful cities in the world, never mind the UK.
I agree.
It's absolutely stunning, Edinburgh.
It is. And I think not just because has the history just entrenched in every piece of stone that is there, right? But my family has lived there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and my dad broke that and to start a new life. And so we're Americans, right? But there's this connection when I go to Edinburgh, and I can't really explain it. I think it's just so many of my ancestors lived in and around that town for so long that there is a feeling of coming home there that I don't get anywhere else that I've ever traveled. I've traveled Europe quite a bit, but all of Scotland, but specifically Edinburgh, I will always have a connection there.
Have you been down in those, I don't know what they call it, it's like not a catacomb, but it's kind of an underground city. Have you been in that part of Edinburgh?
Yeah, American's House.
It's something like that, isn't it? I can't remember what it's called now. It's a couple of years since I was.
That's it, because it was closed over after the plague, and then they discovered it. It's under the Parliament building, I think, and you can go down and stand in a street, basically. Still.
Yeah, it's where people actually used to live underground. It's absolutely amazing place.
Oh, it's just, I know. I've been there a few times, and yes, I love it. So someday I will spend a good quality amount of time in Edinburgh, and I will write a story.
And you'll have to come to England as well, because if you're wanting castles and palaces and things like that, then you're just in the middle of everything, really. It's
great. It's great. When my husband used to travel there, his flat was right across from Hampton Court Palace, and we would go stay there. And that's what I do while he was working. I would just go travel all the palaces and, take notes and go into the city and look at the World Theater. Like, I love that stuff. I could do it all day.
So you've been to all the major tourist places in London then? So the Tower and Hampton Court and everything like that?
Yeah. All that stuff. And I love it. I even love the touristy stuff, and I love the stuff too. You know, I love it all. But yeah.
I'll look forward to that one then when you decide to write a story about Scotland.
Yeah.
But imagining where your research might take you shows just how much curiosity still drives your work. But achievement is its own kind of journey too, and recognition often brings new questions about where to go next. Now, as an award-winning writer, does this complete the circle as in you've actually made it, or even now do you think I've got so much more to offer?
I do not at all think I made it, not even close. The thing about awards is that it gives you a little support, gives you a little jolt that says, keep going, keep doing this. And publishing is incredibly hard. So much is left up to gatekeepers to decide what is marketable. And you get your foot in the door sometimes by how many books you've sold. And there's so many things that are out of your control about publishing that the awards are lovely because it's much more about, did you tell a good story? Did you write it well? And did it resonate? And that's what gets you an award or recognition, which is really great because so much of publishing is not that. So it has done for me is continued to push me forward to work more on developing my craft and learning. Lifelong learning is what it is all about when you're a writer. And the recognition is lovely, but it does nothing more for me other than gives me a little boost to keep going.
It's I was going to say something. I forgot what I was going to say then. It gives you the boost. Exactly. I think that's what I was going to say. It gives you the boost, but it must also give you the confidence then to keep going forward.
Yes.
That's got to be the main thing.
It is really lovely. So the book that was most well received for reviews and for awards was Chasing Eleanor. It is my worst selling book and is the book that I think is one of my strongest and the most emotional, but it just never found its foot in the market. It just never did. But then, so you put in all this effort and work and you get this book out in the world and it just doesn't really sell and you don't know why, but then you have these awards that come in and say, no, this story was worth telling and you did a good job. So you get that recognition in a different way. It's not always about sales.
It's very similar to doing these videos that I do. I did a video a few weeks ago about Thomas Cromwell and his kind of last days and everything. Did 150,000 views. And then I go back to a woman like Athelflaed and she does like 2,000 views.
Yeah.
And I just find it incredible. I think, why couldn't something like about Thomas Cromwell do that many?
Yeah.
And then you do another woman who I think is an absolutely fantastic character to try and tell a story about. And yet people just don't seem interested. It's very strange. It's such an up and down way to see things.
It is. And I've done a few stories on Maria Anna Mozart, Wolfgang's older sister, who was the original, she was the original Mozart and was traveling Europe and playing the most advanced piano work out there. Excuse me. And she has this incredible story. And then she was pulled out when she was 17. She had to get married. Right. And Wolfgang got all of the support and all of the attention, all of the training. And I've told this story so many times and it never goes anywhere. It never gets any views. And I'm thinking, why aren't you fascinated to know that there was a Mozart that was doing this before Wolfgang came along? It really is surprising what takes off and what doesn't. Whereas I did a video about kind of a silly video about Alice Roosevelt, which was Eleanor's cousin. And she was a little outrageous in her own right. She carried a pet snake in her purse that was named Emily Spinach. So she's wild and kooky. And that video got 1 million views. But then I can tell this incredible story as well that doesn't really catch the attention. Maybe it's not as quirky. It's not as outrageous. And yeah, I want there to be space for all of those stories.
Do you think there has to be? I'm really, I've been doing YouTube now for about probably 5 years, and I'm just approaching 100,000 subscribers, which is like, is good. You know, I've done well to get to where I am, but it still surprises me that I've always tried to create videos that would want people to go and do a little bit of their own research.
Yeah.
And I've always believed, although my thought process is changing a little bit now, but I've always believed that, like myself and like you, if you're interested in history, it shouldn't really matter what period or era the story comes from. You should still be able to sit down and think, oh, that was a really good story. But I don't think people's minds, or the majority, don't kind of think like that. And like you say, if you've got a quirky title or something that's a little bit different, they'll go for those things for whatever reason. And I don't really understand, how it works in terms of trying to make an impact with a character.
And you don't know what people are going to identify with. That's what's so wild. I stopped doing videos partly because of that, because of this strive for views, and it was a lot of stress and I didn't really enjoy it. So I now focus on writing those stories on Substack where I can just write them, because that's what I do. I'm a writer, right? I'm more comfortable behind a pen than I am in front of a camera. And so in those, same thing, sometimes something will just take off and then sometimes nothing. And you don't know what's going to hit and where. But so much of our life is set in algorithms, right? And it's curated content based off of what's quick and flashy. And I would love for history to have that moment in there where it's not about the quick and flashy, but just this thirst for knowledge and for more stories. That's really what it should be about.
I agree. I totally agree. Well, anyway, now it's time to talk about Kerry. So where can people find out more about you and information about your books? And of course, any social media sites you'd like to share?
Yeah, my website is kerrywrites.com, Kerry Writes. And all my information about my books is on there and links to where you can buy them. As far as social media, I'm on Instagram and Threads with the same handle, Kerry Writes, as well as on Substack. And that on Substack, I am continuing my Badass Women in History series where we highlight women who have done incredible things but have not gotten noticed.
You're so like me, because I'm only on Instagram and Threads.
Yeah,
that's all I do. I can't be bothered with spreading myself on every single social media site. I just can't see the point.
Well, and I have done it. I have spread myself thin on. I had 30,000 followers on TikTok, and I shut it down because it was too much, and I wasn't getting joy out of it. And I just really decided to pull back to a couple and focus on my writing.
Yeah, I think Instagram Threads is more than enough. And don't forget, everyone, if you want to see all of Kerry's links, will be in that description box below. So a big thank you to you, Kerry, for joining me this week and sharing your life and career as an historical fiction writer. It's great to hear about your journey, your inspiration, and the work that goes into bringing history to life through story. And I'm sure our listeners found it as fascinating as I did. And it would be lovely to have you back soon as you write that next book.
Great. Thanks, John.
And as always, to everyone who's tuned in today, thank you so much. We've still got some more incredible guests coming on History Speaks. So if you love history, you'll love History Roadshow. And don't forget to like, which is one of these, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our historical stories. So until next time, keep exploring the past with us, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.